Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nuts and Bolts with Marquines.
Hi, everyone.
My name is Maria, and this series of short videos are just about that, the nuts and bolts, the technical aspects of art making. We talked about color in the previous videos, and then we released a workshop in design that we'll touch on later. So we wanted to shift gears and talk a little bit about different principles and elements of design. So today we chose to talk about value as one of the elements of composition. And I'm gonna throw a wrench there because Mark will now explain the difference between design, composition, and why is value, first, what is value? And why is it so important for artists out there? So
great. So let me first start with the difference between composition and design, because there's a lot of confusion there. These terms can be used synonymously. You say, oh, that's a great design. Oh, that's a great composition, or that's not so great. So the principles of design are things like balance. Is the piece balanced? Emphasis, emphasizing certain areas, the visual weight of some of the elements, direction that the eye takes, simplicity, hierarchy. These are all the principles, guiding principles of good design. Also in good design, you have 7 elements of composition. So that's the image. So composition elements are things like line, shape, value, which we'll talk about, color, texture, space, and volume. Thank you very much. So those are 7. Now think of the elements of composition, Maria, as arranging these elements. So when we arrange these elements,
like moving parts.
Like moving parts. When we arrange these elements, some or all, in our designs, we are composing. Think of arranging as composing. That's exactly what we do. And we're arranging or composing these elements, hopefully, in an orchestrated way, so the end product is unified and balanced. That's in a nutshell.
We have a successful design.
So we have a successful design. If there's too much or too little of some of those elements in the wrong place, the piece is out of balance, it's not unified, and you have disarray, cacophony, etc.
Perfect.
That's in a nutshell.
One of these pieces, of these moving parts, of these elements of composition is value.
Yes.
So can you just tell us what is value, like the definition of value, and then why is it so important?
Simply put, value has to do, especially when we're talking about color now, is the lightness or darkness of a given color. So yellow is one of the lightest values. Purple, violet are some of the darker colors if you're looking at just the color light spectrum. Okay? If we're looking at shades of gray from white to black, white being the lightest value and black being the darkest. So it has to do with the lightness or darkness of a given color or a gray. Simply put.
And why is it so important?
The $64,000 question. How much time do we have here?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this simple. Well, as one of the compositional elements that we arrange, the first thing I would say is that value creates mood, which is really important to know. So if you have, for instance, a design where all the values are very light. I'm thinking right now of Morandi's paintings, for instance, for those of you who may not or may know Morandi. Usually they're very light in their value and they have a very ephemeral kind of look and quality to them. Versus, let's say, paintings that are darker in their feel, they have a very different feeling of a mood. So the viewer literally has a response emotionally to these values of either color or, in certain cases, black, white, and gray. Now, further answer your question, Maria. So when we're arranging a painting or a design, and we're thinking about value as one of the elements to arrange or compose, if the arrangement is not balanced, maybe too many darks are on one side and there's not enough, then it's off kilter. So placing or arranging, composing if you will, the elements in terms of values becomes really critical. One of the most critical aspects of drawing and painting. And if I could add one last thing. When I work with my students at CCA, when we're working from observation, let's say we're painting the figure on the stage and there's all this backdrop. I say to them, you can be really experimental with color Think of Matisse and others who were very experimental, as long as the value is correct. So a highlight on a figure can be a yellow-green, as long as the value is correct. The shadows of the face can be violet, you see, or dark blue, as long as the values are correct. Okay?
All right, let's jump onto the mixing table and then we'll be back.
All right, see you there. The most basic way to think about value is a spectrum from white to black with just 3 values: the lightest light, the darkest dark, and what's known as the halftone. This is a gray that sits right between these two. So this is the simplest in thinking about value: light, medium, dark, period. Very simple. However, the next step is to find a light halftone that sits between here and here. That's a light halftone, and then there's a dark halftone that sits between here, Maria. And this is what I have my students at CCA. I drill this into their psyches. So they're always thinking at least 5 values. And we have this language: light halftone, dark halftone. Keeping in mind there are many light halftones, keeping in mind there are many dark halftones. Maria, the setup couldn't be any simpler. White acrylic paint, black acrylic paint, some white paper heavy so it doesn't buckle on you, and some water. You don't need much water, by the way. So here I am with white paint. In fact, I can do this probably without water. And it's white on white. Now, the interesting thing about acrylics is that they do dry a little bit darker. So that's just white on white. I just need a touch of the black to change that. And this is the key for everyone to experiment with. So now I'm in the realm of light halftones. Just like that. There are other tones in between these, you see. Let's continue. So just knowing how much black to use to make what's called the gradations, the differences, is important. So that is 3 gradations from white to light halftone, and I'm moving towards a halftone. You can see that. There are other grays in between, just to note that. So the key here is for the artist to decide how many steps they want to take. The subtler the gradations of tones, obviously the more steps they're going to be taking. I'm making sure right now that there's a significant jump. We call this value jumps, Maria and others. And you can see there's a nice jump in between these. Now I'm reaching halftone. This feels to me like it's getting very close to a halftone between white and black. So let me continue. Well, you have to pay attention, everybody. And this is where you have to slow down enough. Don't rush this. Pay attention, and you can even test if you want to, but I'm just going to eyeball this for now. And I'm showing in just several steps the difference between one value and the other. This is a nice value. That's a good difference between here and there. Now I'm moving towards the dark halftones, and you can see that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps so far. You have to pay close attention, as I said, keeping in mind that the acrylic paints oftentimes will dry darker by a few percents, depending on the brand. But here I have, I'm sure, a very nice dark halftone. It's a nice jump. Notice how my jumps are fairly even from one note to the other, and you can see that. And in short order, Maria, I'm right near the end of this particular spectrum, and we'll do a count here. I'm reaching right towards black. In fact, I'll just take it right to black, just to keep this simple for our time and purposes. And there's a point to be made here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. I could have done it in 9 steps, 11 steps, 13 steps, etc. if the mixes were much subtler. Now from here, I can probably point to this as being approximately my halftone. These are my light halftones and my dark halftones. So in short order, I created a spectrum from light to dark. It's that simple. So one can experiment and do it in a very informal way. This is a more formal way of doing it, so they butt right up against each other and you really see the difference. I want to make a point about how many steps. Notice, everyone, that there are more light halftones here and more dark halftones. There are 10 steps here, but I want to make a point about that. Here we went larger as we showed people in the language of design course that we created. And this is an odd number. These are 11 steps. And it makes better sense, and I'll tell you why. If you take out here and their halftone, it sits right in between. You have 3 light halftones and you have 3 dark halftones. So I think 11 steps is really good for that reason. 9, 11, 13, these are good odd numbers to do so that the halftone, see, this doesn't really have one, it's right, it sits in between. That's the point I wanted to make to the artists out there. Stay with your odd numbers.
After seeing the actual mixing process, remind us just one more time about why is it important to understand it, do it, and how do we apply this in our work, in our studio?
The rationale. And I can't help but think this conversation we had the other day with a musician, a drummer, who was talking about he had conversations with other really good musicians and they did their scales on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So think of the value scale as the equivalent to a musician's scale. It's so important to the language and the vocabulary of understanding composition and good design. We'll start with that.
Okay.
We have an example of seeing abstractly, and this is actually an exercise we did in the language of design, and Maria actually did this particular exercise where you pick a master's studies. Again, here we have Degas, and Maria took a piece of tracing paper and traced over the shapes in the most simple and abstract way and created a completely new design based on what she was seeing here. For those of you who have never done this before, one way to help you is to turn it upside down, which is really profound, because then you're not looking at details, heads, windows, doors. You're seeing the shapes, and this is the key. You're seeing the shapes by virtue of their value, light, medium, and dark. And it is so awakening to so many artists who are struggling, frankly, to think about value in their own work, and in looking at other artists, thinking about how can I analyze and see what these other artists are up to. And this is a very powerful tool and exercise. And we talk much more about it in the language of design course.
So if I were to sum it up for those who maybe want to try some of these things that we touched on, it would be to definitely get some white and black paint and experiment and do the journey from white to black. So start with white, adding a little bit of black at a time. And you can do it very simply with just brush strokes on a piece of paper, even in your notebook, journal book, whatever you have.
Right, very simple.
And if you want to go, to make it for your own studio, then take a little bit of a thicker paper, make it a little bit nicer, neater, and put it on the wall so that you have that experience. Find in that range the gray that sits right in between, that you feel sits right in between, and then some light halftones and dark halftones that then sit in between, right? The white and the halftone, and between the halftone and the black.
Yes.
So that you kind of get a little bit of that feel and understanding. Then if you want to see, well, what are other artists up to? I would say pick a few images from either a book or the internet, and then you can either make a black and white photocopy, you can take a black and white picture. If you're using Photoshop, you can just desaturate it, so you erase, you strip the color off, and then what you're left with is the values. And then think of that, translate those images that you like, even your own work, if you dare to go there, into the black and white spectrum. And just see what's going on there. Where are your lightest lights? Where are your darkest darks?
And the relationships.
The relationships between them, and what are your midtones, right? And just kind of get yourself into that other gear, translating color into value. And then in the future videos, we might go a little bit deeper into that, giving you ideas. But obviously in the language of design, we dedicated a whole chapter of the workshop to value. So we'll drop a link also in the description for you to go there, and maybe this will tickle your imagination and you wanted to know more about the language of design. But yes, going back to the basics is always a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Never beneath anyone. If I can dovetail very quickly, Maria, I do encourage painters to take a photograph of your work, whether it's in progress or whether you think it's finished, and convert it to black and white. We go to the mono setting, which we like, and you'll see whether it feels harmonious or balanced. You might discover, oh my gosh, there's all these dark notes on this side and the eye doesn't move to the other half of the piece, things like this. So very useful tool for seeing your own work critically.
So we hope that you enjoyed this. Different pairs of glasses on your eyes. Try it. Try to see the world a little bit in black and white and see how it works for you. Drop in the comments your experiences. Is it challenging? Did you discover something new? Is it fun? Is it scary and daunting? How is the black and white world working for you?
And have you discovered the value of value?
Oh, the value. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.